Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this webinar entitled A Test for Democracy, Moldova's High-Stakes 2025 Parliamentary Elections, organized in the framework of the international research project REDEMOS. My name is Madalina Dobrescu. I am an Associate Professor of European Studies at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, NTNU, in Trondheim, Norway, and I'm the Principal Investigator of REDEMOS. And it is in this capacity that I have the pleasure of hosting today's webinar and moderating our conversation today with our two guest speakers, Paula Erizanu and Iulian Groza. Before I introduce Paula and Iulian, allow me to say just a few words about REDEMOS for those of you who are not yet familiar with our project. REDEMOS, the acronym which stands for Reconfiguring EU Democracy Support Towards a Sustained Demos in the EU's Eastern Neighbourhood, is an international research project bringing together a total of 11 universities, research centres, think tanks, and one web solution-oriented small and medium enterprise from all across Europe. Our project started in January 2023, and we are close to the end now. So we are due to end in December 2025, at the end of this year. The project is funded through the European Union's Horizon Europe program, as well as UK Research and Innovation, and the Swiss State Secretariat for Education, Research and Innovation. REDEMOS explores the state of European Union democracy support efforts towards its eastern neighborhood, and in so doing, it works towards providing, we hope, new and innovative policy solutions that can create a more effective, impactful, resilient, and sustainable pathway to democracy. And of course, speaking about pathways to democracy brings me to today's topic, namely the decisive parliamentary elections held by Moldova on Sunday, the 28th of September, and which President Maia Sandu herself declared to be the most consequential in the country's history in a speech that she gave to the European Parliament last month. Indeed, as we all know, a lot hinged on the outcome of these elections, including Moldova's ability to continue on a pro-European path, its democratic development, its security. Again, it was President Sandu who said, as she was casting her ballot, that she voted to keep the peace. And some would say that these elections have been critical even for Moldova's very independence. Now, fortunately, to the joy and relief of all of those rooting for a democratic Moldova within the EU, the country's ruling pro-European Party of Action and Solidarity, PAS, claimed a clear victory and a new majority in parliament, winning 50.2% of the vote, securing 55 parliamentary seats, which of course is an impressive achievement if we are to think of the scale of Russian interference and the reported attempts to violently disrupt the vote during the process. We are joined today by two very knowledgeable experts who kindly agreed to share their insights on these elections with us, Paula Erizanu and Iulian Groza. Paula is a well-published journalist and author whose work has featured in prominent media outlets such as The Guardian, The Financial Times, Medusa, Novaya Gazeta, London Review of Books, CNN, Open Democracy, and I will stop here because there are many more. A very warm welcome, Paula.
Thank you.
Iulian is the Executive Director of the Institute for European Policies and Reforms, IPRE, in Chișinău, and an expert on foreign policy, European affairs, and good governance. Iulian is also a former Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Moldova, responsible for European integration, a position that was preceded by various roles within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and European integration, as well as the Moldovan mission to the EU. Thank you for being with us today, Iulian.
Hello to everyone, Madalina, Paula, great to be here with you.
Thank you so much to both of you. Now, I would like to kick off our discussion by asking both of you to say a few words about the broader significance of these elections. how were they framed by competing political forces? How did the voters themselves perceive them? And who were people voting for at the end of the day? Paula, would you like to get us started?
Sure. I'm more used to the kind of dialogue form. So I know you said you give us around 10 minutes, but I will say what I think I have to say. And if there is, any question that you have, please to kick in. So for most people who voted pro-European, this was a geopolitical election. The vote was not so much for the PAS party itself, which has faced lots of criticism over the past 4 years for various mistakes or things they've done that didn't quite meet the high expectations that the voters had. But it was a vote to continue EU integration and to avoid the kind of instability and insecurity that being linked to Russia once again would mean, because there was a lot of kind of talk about how if pro-Russians come to power in Moldova, then Moldova may be dragged into the war in Ukraine, possibly through agents of destabilization that would go from the breakaway region Transnistria into southern Ukraine to Odessa, which is only 2 hours away. But also with the kind of drone wars and the kind of invasions of drones in Poland and Romania and so on, there was also fear that drones could be launched from Moldova. I'm sure Iulian has more to say about this because it's closer to his area of expertise. But this was kind of what was dominating the discourse for pro-European voters. And the result that PAS got is all the more surprising given that Moldova has struggled with 35% inflation, up to 35% inflation. This is following the pandemic, but also the energy crisis that started in 2021 when Russia reduced the gas volumes to Moldova. And so the Moldovan government had to find alternative energy sources and also on the international market, but also by encouraging renewables within the country. And then the inflation was also an effect of the war in neighboring Ukraine, with all of these together have really impacted people's kind of pockets. And although there were subsidies that the government was offering for the high bills and so on, still a lot of people have been affected by the growing prices. And this takes me to the kind of more pro-Russian voters. The kind of slogans that the pro-Russian network was using a lot in their campaign was to do with the high prices and with the desire for cheap gas, as we once had, so Russian gas in particular, and also this kind of neutrality discourse that we should be friends with both the East and the West, and not kind of provoke Russia or not kind of be used, let ourselves be used by NATO or the EU to be dragged into the war between itself and Russia. So these would be the kind of grand scheme of things, but also people who voted for opposition parties had this kind of idea that PAS is incompetent and corrupt and dictatorial. So this was the discourse promoted by opposition parties, in particular the pro-Russian parties. Some pro-European parties had slightly more nuanced criticism of the government.
Iulian, would you like to take it up from there?
Yes, indeed. I'll try to use my time to reflect on the significance, but also looking a bit ahead on the current upcoming parliament landscape. Also a bit addressing some of the challenges, in particular looking at Transnistrian region, but also to try to see what may be the next steps that we should take and what attacks we can expect from Russia further. So yeah, to build on what Paula said in terms of the significance of these elections, evidently it was not a routine democratic exercise. We were at a decisive inflection point for Moldova's future, democratic future. And indeed, it's what we had at stake. It was not just, to answer to the question of who will govern the country in the next 4 years, but whether Moldova would stay and continue on the track of development and anchoring itself into the European Union, or risking in sliding back into Russia's sphere of influence. So the result was clear and powerful. Also, we had over 55 participation rate, one of the highest actually in the last years. Still not as high it was as what we had at the presidential elections in the second round last year, but still higher than the participation rate we had in the previous parliament elections. Out of this majority who participated, over 50% voted for the current governing party, and effectively for President Maia Sandu mandate to continue Moldova's advancement towards European Union. So it was a vote beyond political support to one single party. It was clear, and Paula has mentioned that, it was in many ways a vote for a vision, for a sovereign democratic European Moldova. It was also in many ways a vote against Russia's attempts to interfere, to destabilize the country through various means that they used and continue to use. And the campaign narratives indeed reflected, in a way, an historical choice. Pro-European forces presented the vote as a geopolitical decision about Moldova's place into the EU, its security, its modernization. On the other hand, pro-Russian actors, by contrast, sought to frame it in a kind of a referendum on governance failure, on government failures, economic hardship, and geopolitical choices. Yet the voters understood the stakes, and of course, the war in Ukraine, the mounting pressure from Russia, the broader security environment, ongoing these cyber threats and everything else shaped our choices. It has to be mentioned that before the elections, we had various polls organized. We also did our own polling, and indeed we had about 30 to 40% undecided voters, which was, it is quite high, though not something uncommon for elections these days in Europe. But ultimately, what we have observed, of course, a consolidation of the vote, increasing the critical mass for pro-European vote. So while most of Moldovans voted for EU integration, considering the fact that we had undecided, of course, many before the elections, doubted of capacity of Moldova to deliver tangible results in some foreseeable future. And at the end of the day, bridging this gap between European aspirations and real world, outcomes, real things on the ground, it became the government's most important priority, and will be the most priority for the next government to come. I'll talk about that in a few seconds later, but just to point to one lesson learned, I think, of Moldova, of these elections, is that Moldova, number one, was not alone in this effort, in countering the threats that Russia has waged against Moldova. We have seen tremendous political, geopolitical, financial support coming from our allies, EU, US. We managed to see an enhancement of our societal resilience and the resilience of the institutions. So basically, with what we have managed to observe, kind of a whole of society effort, which was happening, involving governmental institutions, business, civil society, media, local authorities, international parties, all work together to expose disinformation, to disrupt illegal financing, criminal networks, protect democratic institutions, and the unity. This unity made Moldova stronger and to succeed. And I mentioned business because this was something specific for these elections, which was not the case before. So we've seen this mobilization of the business community, entrepreneurs that took stance, active civic stance, projecting this picture of Moldova in 2028 that is very important for Moldova's development. And basically, the business went out and campaigned for mobilizing people to vote and explaining the stakes of the vote. And I think that was also important. Now, looking ahead, resilience and reform must advance hand in hand, it's clear. And when we talk about reform, we talk about EU accession negotiations for the next 3-4 years. It's clear we have a clear calendar ahead of us, 2028. Before the elections on Sunday, last week we finished the screening process, basically an important step towards starting negotiations on the chapters. We have already a green line from the Council. We have an issue to solve. Not we, but EU has the issue to solve in order how to proceed that with Moldova and Ukraine. But it's clear that Moldova will advance as soon as possible the talks, and the calendar is very clear. 2028 is the ambitious deadline for finalizing negotiations to allow time, even during this mandate of the European Commission, the mandate of the current parliament, and the mandate of the current president in Moldova, to bring Moldova to the European Union. Now, briefly about the landscape, the parliamentary landscape that we have now in the parliament. It's clear that PAS has secured its political stance within the parliament. Before the elections, it was not clear that PAS will manage to secure a comfortable majority. It was really on the edge because nobody could predict the impact of still existing networks of illegal financing of political activities, disinformation, the impact of TikTok, the impact of vote buying schemes, and so on and so forth, even though the authorities have been very vigilant and more proactive than we had seen them last year. So it's clear now that we have a clear party majority, but it is also clear that what we could expect in the weeks to come for the leading party in the parliament being invited by the president, as she already mentioned, to engage in the consultations, cross-cutting, consultations that will go beyond even political parties in the parliament, going outside and to non-parliamentary parties, civil society, business, everyone, to try to assemble a government that would indeed act as a government of national unity. Because exactly what we have at stake is Moldova's joining the EU, and this is indeed go beyond party interests. One party or more party interests is actually our interests as a country, as a nation. So that is very important to see. Then we will see what will be the outcome of this process. Of course, in the parliament, to note, in this parliament, what we have observed is that the opposition landscape changed. If in the last parliament we had mainly two opposition parties, one obviously pro-Russian driven, affiliated to Shore, and the other one socialist communists, also open pro-Russian parties. This time what we observe a decrease of pro-Russian parties support, representation in the parliament, while they still will be, I think, quite an active opposition. On that, you have two other political actors, newcomers in the parliament. We will see, or three actually. We will see how they will act in the parliament. Now, about challenges. It's clear that now that Russia lost elections in Moldova, because they indeed aimed to win elections in Moldova through proxies and through the interferences. Now that they lost elections in Moldova, we could expect Russia pressure to continue and to exploit other vulnerabilities that we still have. And we have, I think, one of the most the biggest challenges that we need to look at carefully is the situation in Transnistria region. We know that we still have illegal military presence in the region. We have one of the largest munitions depot in Europe still there. And we have quite intense, not only military, but also intelligence presence of Russia in the region. And the kleptocratic elites in the region that share the power of Russia in the region, that managed to, in the last 3-4 years, when the war started, to maintain kind of a pragmatic business approach between Chisinau and Tiraspol, maintaining peace and stability. Their space is being challenged and is shrinking under the pressure of Russia, because Moldova in the last 3-4 years managed to cut strains from Russia, including in terms of energy dependency. Moldova today is 0% dependent on gas, electricity supply, which was not the case earlier, but Transnistrian region is still very much dependent on Russian supplies. The difference is that Russia, of course, has started to instrumentalize the energy dependency of the region at the beginning of this year, actually trying to create a humanitarian crisis to overwhelm the authorities at early this year when they cut the supplies of gas, trying to blame Ukraine or Moldova for not being able to supply it, connecting it to the fact that the gas transit over Ukraine territory has been stopped. But Russia did not do much effort to continue to find supply of this gas through other routes. And actually what it happened at the end of the day, after big crisis and also some response that Moldova was able to prepare to the region, which was refused by the region, ultimately basically they engaged into some shady kind of contracts for supply of this gas in a more limited amount. But the difference is that they have to pay for it. And it's interesting to mention that, in the next days after the election results this week, we already seen some signals coming from the region. For example, again, signals of diminishing of supply of gas ahead of the winter time. And that may be also connected to some developments that will happen in the region. Number one, in November, we expect the local so-called elections in the assembly in the Transnistrian region. But next year, we have so-called presidential elections in the region. And of course, with the winter coming, with the dependencies that the region has still and the presence of Russia there, that may be exploited by Russia, because Russia would, of course, want to entrench further in the region and try to use the region into destabilizing, attempting to destabilize Moldova further from its track, but also create increase security attention from Ukraine and so on and so forth. So we need to be very careful about next steps that Russia can use. They probably could try and already tried to actually to attack energy infrastructure of Ukraine connected to Moldova as well. Last month, I think we have seen attacks over the pumping station in Orlovka in Ukraine, which is pumping the gas to Moldova. So far, it was okay. It was not affected, but we cannot exclude this type of things to come further. We cannot exclude attacking the current existing high voltage grid that we use to supply the electricity from Europe. We don't buy it anymore from Transnistrian region, but it comes through the region. The controller is in the ingress in Transnistrian region, where we still don't have full control. So Russia can use that as well to try to blackmail again Moldova. The good news is that Moldova is on full speed in finalizing an alternative grid with Romania. The deadline is December. So far, it's progressing. So I think Moldova has backups to mitigate this type of crisis. Plus, we have the EU support in terms of projects and also direct support to mitigate potential increased energy prices that we can predict to come. So that's basically some of the things that we may expect where Russia could continue to put pressure on us. So, but to conclude, again, this election was a strategic victory of the European democracy. Proved that Moldova and Moldovan people, though under huge pressure from Russia, through their sovereign choices, are determined to shape their future. sending signals not only to the region, to Europe, to Kremlin, but also to other countries that look now at Moldova very carefully as an inspiration, if that's not to say too more, but that's exactly how things are happening. So I think that is important. It showed that Moldovan people believe in the European project. They want to anchor the country in the European project. It was a second referendum, if you want, a reconfirmed referendum of last year, with higher participation, high numbers in support of that track. So it's clear that Moldovans want to be part of Europe. And Moldova proved that working together in a society with the support with our partners and allies, we can defeat Russia's attempts to interfere. We need to work more on that. We need to build up internal cohesion. We need to work on reforms. The track is clear. Unity, resilience, reform will be the pillars of Moldova's European future and project in the years to come. And the election shows that the country is ready to build and to advance. Thank you.
Thanks, Iulian, for very, very comprehensive and interesting initial impulse and insights into the election. I think you've already touched on a number of important issues that we can unpack, I think, in the rest of the webinar. Before we continue, I would also like to say to the participants and invite them actually to ask their questions already. If there are any questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A box. We will take them up as we proceed. There's no reason to wait until the very end, so please get started with the questions. In the meantime, I would like to go back to Paula and invite her to comment on one of the issues that Iulian indeed raised, and that is the new configuration of the parliament, right? We know that PAS has, of course, secured a majority. They have 55 seats. We know that the patriotic electoral, pro-Russian patriotic electoral bloc has secured 26 seats. Then we have 20 other seats which are distributed amongst several parties whose, let's say, positioning in terms of pro-European, pro-Russian is not as clear. There's a bit of vagueness there. And Iulian said, yeah, we have to see how this will play out and to what extent PAS can manage to actually extend cooperation potentially to some of these parties. I wonder what your views are on what can we expect from these. Essentially, we are dealing with three, two parties and I suppose one bloc. Yeah, we're talking about the Alternativa bloc, about our party, and the surprise sort of entry into parliament, Democracy at Home party. Where do they stand and what can we expect from them?
Yeah, so if the kind of patriotic bloc is kind of obviously and openly aligned to Russia, although their rhetoric would mostly be focused on neutrality and good relations with East and West rather than a kind of an open love for Putin, to put it bluntly. Then the other parties, like the alternative bloc, it says it is pro-European, but actually, if you look at the members of this bloc, then they have all kind of had some links to pro-Russian parties and governments before. So the main leader of this bloc is Ioan Ceban, the mayor of Chisinau. He used to be a member of the Socialists Party, and he even kind of protested against Moldova's EU partnership agreement with the EU in 2014 in Brussels. And then this summer, he got banned by Romania and the Schengen area for security reasons. So that kind of put a bigger question mark around his pro-European affiliation in front of the pro-European voters. And then the other three kind of leaders of the party, of the bloc, include Alexandru Stoianoglu, the former Prefect General, and also the former presidential candidate who lost from Maia Sandu last year. Ion Chicu, the former prime minister, and under Igor Dodon, and Marc Caciuc, who was a presidential advisor to Voronin. So all of them have these links to Russian kind of politicians in Moldova and Russian allies here, despite the fact that they pretend to have a pro-European rhetoric, which is actually a kind of adaptation of Russia. They study the population really well. They do all sorts of surveys, and then they see if the pro-European option becomes more popular, then they will also invest in parties that declare themselves pro-European. And I think like a lot of them abstained from the vote last year in the referendum for EU. And then our party, which got 6 out of 101 seats, is I would call both our party and Democracy Home two populist parties. So their leaders are big on social media. Our party is led by Renato Usatei. He's a very colorful character, often uses quite vulgar language, which I guess happens in bigger and more powerful countries nowadays as well. And he has a kind of strange past where he worked with the Russian state railways and made lots of money there, but then had some sort of investigation started against him there, had some links to Vlad Filat in the past, so our former prime minister, where he was trying to kind of schmooze him, get him tickets to a big football game and so on, and fly him on a private jet. So this is the kind of character he is, and he often kind of appears on television with this new information, insider information, which he gets from his sources that he has actually admitted to having paid. So he kind of pays public servants to give him exclusive information. It doesn't often get confirmed, so it's not like he always speaks the truth, but it's quite interesting to kind of follow him as a character. And his program was quite messy, and it promised everything and anything, but a lot of it was kind of aligned to the Russian rhetoric, for instance, surrounding LGBT communities and so-called propaganda, and the kind of traditional family, and so on. And the Democracy Home Party, I mean, my colleagues in journalism have been following this party and its leader for quite some time. I was trying to kind of ignore him. Which I guess just shows that Vasile Kostyuk, who is the leader of this party, is a bit like what Călin Georgescu was in Romania, in the sense that he was kind of under the radar for opinion polls. So no opinion poll gave him the chance of passing the threshold, but then he had huge traction on TikTok, some traction even in the diaspora. And the rhetoric, his rhetoric is kind of unionist, so reunification with Romania, but he also campaigned for the far-right Our Party last year, and then so he was on the list of the Our Party last year, and then in 2025 he supported George Simion, the Romanian presidential candidate, in the race, and there have been kind of talks about how the Our network, online and social media network, has been used to push Kostyuk and the Democracy Home Party further up, getting like ridiculous amounts of views that would have meant that Moldovans should have watched videos with Kostyuk day and night and several times all over, because our population is quite small. So this would be the kind of the parties that we'll have in parliament in a nutshell. What I should add is that George Simeon is banned in both Ukraine and Moldova for security reasons. So presumably from what has been kind of said in the public space, there is concern that Simeon has met up with Russian spies in Chernivtsi or Chernivtsi in Ukraine. So that kind of indicates that Democracy Home may also be linked to Russia. But maybe Iulian wants to add something here. Maybe you spent more time on TikTok.
No, actually, during these elections, as many of us did, trying to, inform people, mobilize people, get to outvote campaigns and so on and so forth. I also opened the TikTok account on Friday and posted my videos there. Yeah, it's very intense there. But to mention, I mean, there was even a question about TikTok here as well, and Paula already mentioned it. What we have seen in the news, but also from the reports of the authorities, now actually we have a challenge in the CEC linked to party Democracy at Home, Mr. Kostyuk, of alleged illegal or non-compliant activities linked to the campaigning connected to use of TikTok in influencing the vote, plus the network of Simeon. Because what we have seen from Romanian reports, there was actually some information about the fact that Simeon actually and his party has been backing up Vasile Kostyuk not only in Moldova but also in diaspora. So that can be explained. There are also some of the colleagues, experts, who are of the opinion that the impact on the result of Kostyuk may go beyond TikTok. However, we did some internal research about the polling, and we did a poll which we had not published before the elections. And actually, we already identified that Kostyuk would be on the margin of getting into the parliament, which may explain that it may go beyond some backing up that he could have gotten from other networks like Shore and Plahotniuc network, because there were these kind of speculations that the part of Democracy at Home may have been also backed by the network of Shore and Plahotniuc, though there were no direct proofs on that at this stage. The only thing which was obvious was the TikTok. So looking at the polling that we have done like 2 weeks before the elections, it was indicating that Democracy at Home will get about 5%, which means that I think the impact of TikTok network had a bigger impact because Mr. Kostyuk's party was not very popular. Plus, we have to admit that he was he had a very, how should I say, contradictory campaign, trying to undermine rules, trying to violate legislation so that he could be caught by the police, and then he would project that image over TikTok that he is being persecuted for political reasons. But I think it was clear strategy of the campaign. He was actually violating rules in a way to be caught, seen, to interact with the authorities, and then to present that as being persecuted. So I think that this victimization aspect probably could also channel some undecided voters that usually somehow affiliated to these more sovereignist, globalists, Sorosist kind of narratives, and that may have attracted, pumped up also by TikTok network that apparently worked for Kostyuk. That I think may be one of the explanations. But otherwise, I think Paula mentioned a good part of it. The bottom line is that we have some unknowns still. We don't know how strong will be the blocks in the parliament. Given that before the election we have some misunderstanding, or at least public perception of some misunderstandings along the blocks, the two blocks that enter the parliament, both patriotic bloc and alternative bloc.
That was really fun.
And you had this internal confrontation which was going against, the idea of the bloc, and I think that also in a way impacted the trust of traditional pro-Russian voters into these blocs, or the pro-European voters that were looked by Alternativa bloc, because they have been presenting themselves an Alternativa to the governing party, pro-European party. I think the challenge for Mr. Ceban and his party, that was actually in the lead of this bloc, was to convince the pro-European undecided voters about their real agenda. Precisely because among the political, you have politicians with some experience, but the majority of the politicians within this Alternativa bloc were actually with a background in communist Dodon times. So it was very, very difficult. Actually, I think a good part of the electorate of Ceban was not happy with that. And if you look at the results in Chisinau, after 2 years of local elections where he got a majority and then he decided to create the party, in Chisinau, he got about 14 to 15%. So huge decrease. And looking at the reactions of Mr. Ceban now, when he is basically reviewing his human resources policies in Chisinau and his party, it's very likely that it was a surprise for them. But in a way, I think many people was predicting that this unorthodox kind of bloc could not resist the wall of criticism and trust of people that really wanted to see an alternative to pass. And I think the fact that they provided an alternative with the same time of politicians that have a bigger profile in being acting in political parties that were more pro-Russian, it was very difficult for them to convince. And Mr. Osate was not a surprise that he will enter. I think he's surprised that he got less. Some say that he's happy that he didn't got more. And some say that he's happy that PAS got a majority, so not to be somehow in a position to take more active stance on pro-European flank, because he's indeed a populist, a Moldova-centric politician, trying to keep distance from having a very clear pro-Russian rhetoric, but also not very, very obvious kind of pro-European kind of politician with some track record to prove some concrete deeds and acts connected to that process. So he was more kind of ambivalent, exploiting more Moldova-centric rhetoric, exploiting this rhetoric of more conservative rhetoric. And I think what also helped Renato Osate was a very good local structuring of his party, and he had a number of mayors part of his party. I think what helped Renato Osate is the campaign, which was indeed, when you look at the program, it was a bit everything. But he managed to assemble around him in the party some new people, professionals basically. Very difficult to have any questions about their integrity. So professional. So he managed to assemble some teams that were more kind of presenting themselves as more honest and professionals. Some of them, and for example, former member of the CEC, he was a civil servant, and he became part of his party, and he was campaigning even before the presidential elections in his support. But again, looking at the presidential elections, definitely what we can say is that the very important support that President Sandu got in the second round of elections it actually was reconfirmed in this parliamentary elections. It helped to channel the undecided voters who still were not very happy with the governing party towards that party in the result because of the stakes and because indeed these elections, as we discuss now, it was not really about one party vote. It was about the future. It was about the stakes. I think that helped to mobilize. But looking at the other two candidates that we had at the presidential, Mr. Stoyanoglu, for example, he couldn't transfer that support that he got or the plans that probably Mr. Chaban had in mind, having this coalition with Mr. Stoyanoglu, would probably transfer some of the vote results in the presidential to his support. It didn't happen. Also probably because at that time in the presidential elections, Mr. Stoyanoglu was backed by socialists more, and unfortunately he at that time he was not in a position to reject the influence of the Shore network that worked that we know now that worked also for the second round in his support. And ultimately, Mr. Osate also could not, back up this about 50% support that he got in the presidential elections last year to transfer it into the party result. But yeah, the good news is we have a parliament which has more political parties. For sure, this parliament will be much more interesting. We have more. We'll come back to a more contradictory debate, political debate in the parliament, to the limit of a show, because we will have some showmen political showmen with very concrete background. So that will be clear. But I think the bottom line to me is that what it is clear is that pro-Russian politicians clearly pro-Russian politicians are in smaller numbers in this parliament. You don't have clearly like a political party, directly or indirectly, obviously supported by Shore or affiliated to Shore. So that's the difference of this new legislator. So we will see. But it is clear for me that there'll be a lot of work for everyone, in particular for those who would support this national idea and the message of the people and the very clear the very clear way for Moldova for the next 4 years. And hopefully this will help to further, entrench Moldova into the European track, and at the same time strengthen and empower our resources, administrative resources. Because a part of the European integration agenda of the country, we still have some very important structural reforms to conduct. We need to finalize the justice reform, which has been started. We need to initiate and do it quite fast, but in a very inclusive way, very prepared way. The administrative reform, the public administration reform, which was long overdue. In particular, that we have local elections in 2 years' time. So before that, we need to look into that and make sure that we address that. But I think what will help, it will help at transparency, predictability of the process, because everything will be connected to our process of negotiations of accession to the EU. We now know what exactly we need to do. We know the priorities. We have some support available, very important support coming from the EU to support that reform agenda. And I think what we need to work more is indeed to work on the internal resilience, societal resilience. I think we proved that we can succeed if we indeed work together and protect our country, our democracy. This hybrid defense umbrella that we managed to create together with our partners, I think needs to be extended. To me, this needs to be extended,
Iulian, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to actually bring a follow-up question, because you're talking about the hybrid defense umbrella, and we actually have some very, very interesting questions. Well, yes, now they're getting quite so many, so let me just select a little bit. there was indeed the first participant who was asking about TikTok. So I think a three-pronged question related to the key differences that we have seen in the way Russia has acted, in terms of disinformation, interference strategies between 24 and now, whether we see a difference in tactics, then also whether we see a difference between what Russia has been doing in Moldova and what it has been doing in other Eastern European countries. And a question that I also actually had, so that would be number 3, how do you expect now Russia to act in the future, based on all of this experience accumulated? How can we expect Russia to act in Moldova's next elections, for instance, or not necessarily wait until elections, but now in the post-election environment? What are we to expect from Russia? Iulian made some remarks about what can we expect in Transnistria. I would also be very interested to hear about what can we expect from Russia within Moldova proper. What type of provocations? Are they any different from what we have seen so far? Are we likely to see a sort of aggravation of this? And maybe I will let Paula start.
Well, I think Iulian has covered some of this ground already, but what we do have in Moldova, like in many other countries, but particularly Eastern European countries, is a lot of agents of Russian influence. Some of them more openly known than others. And so we can expect acts of sabotage from them, where if they are infiltrated in PAS, for instance, or in state institutions, and also anything that could divide the country and kind of undermine the government and Moldova's EU path. More protests probably, and the use of kind of Transnistria against Moldova. This is what we have been seeing, but at the same time, the other thing happened as well. So some of the heroes of this campaign have been investigative journalists who went undercover in the Russian networks, in these troll farms and so on. And if last year we had this European Press Prize winning investigation from Ziarul de Gardă, this year there was an entire kind of mass of investigations which showed that investigative journalists can also use, the methods that Russian spies used, but against them, in order to kind of reveal what their schemes are and show that, the famous Russian intelligence is actually not quite as all-powerful. Before this election, we were afraid of a kind of Georgia scenario, where parties that may declare themselves pro-European may eventually show their true colors and stop Moldova's EU accession. And that may still happen in the next elections. I mean, who will be our next president? What is the kind of pro-European alternative to PAS? It's not clear yet. One interesting kind of detail is that in its attempt to kind of become this party of national unity, PAS has not just invited public figures to join its list and kind of attract popularity, but also 2 members of an opposition party, a pro-European party, that didn't have a chance to pass the threshold, and so decided not to run in elections. But instead, they became part of the party of the PAS list. and now they will act as independents in parliament. So that will be a kind of interesting development to follow as well.
I can briefly comment on one, on others, but on one in particular, because Paula mentioned the protests. We have measured in our research this year the overall attitude of the citizens towards various topics and the degree that would generate anxiety that would lead for protests. Overall, our assessment is that the level of attitude, protest attitude towards in Moldova, it's somewhere low. And if you look at the various so-called protests that have been attempted to be organized and mobilized throughout this year in the elections campaign, but also after election campaign, you would see that there is not so numerous numbers of people that would engage into a protest. So the appetite for protests in Moldova today is quite low. The great opportunity for protests for these elections was, I mean, of the time was the elections actually. And the elections show, the stakes show that the response of the society in this time of uncertainty, of security threats, but also opportunities for the country, people decided to concentrate what matters more. So I think if to look at the lessons learned of last year presidential election and referendum, I think over this year, in 1 year time, Moldova, I think, managed to break the wall of this polarization that we had and we still have, with an increased critical mass in the society that has mobilized around one topic, around one objective, irrespective of their social position, their roles, their attitudes, criticism, political criticism they will have, but that actually in the end helped to unite the society, including, I think, at the local level. It's very interesting to mention that, of course, in Gagauzia you didn't see, because I saw a quick question about that. You don't see still a big change in terms of political representation of, I mean, people's political representation. You still have in the region political parties. I mean, you don't have pro-reform, pro-European parties supported in the region in the big numbers. I think now it was a bit about around 5% support for the PAS. It was, of course, for Patriotic Bloc, which was socialists. It was the support for Alternativa. I think they had a role, I think, played by Stoyanoglu because he's from Gagauzia. And you had also, other parties that got some results, but PAS got very little support in Gagauzia. For the voters from the Transnistrian region that participated in elections, a third of them actually voted for PAS, which is a very clear indicator of the situation in the region, of the over 10 years of bridging process between Moldova and the rest of the country in the region. This visa-free trade anchoring of the region towards the European Union market and our market. The war, of course, it has impact. I think the Russia pressure in the region increased. The economic situation in the region is disastrous. I think they have about 150% recession there. They are not sustainable. So I think people see also for them that being part of kind of a pro-European Moldova, it creates an alternative for them. So that is I wanted to mention. Maybe I can also mention about US because Tobias also asked in
Thank you. That was exactly, I was going to raise that question. Thanks.
It's interesting, of course, the current US administration, even though at the beginning of the year you seen kind of a seizure, I mean, all the funding of the US stopped at the beginning of the year after the new administration came. USAID activities stopped. You had seen how political actors, in particular those pro-Russian, but also those who are somehow driven by this sovereignist agenda, you would see how they would present the fact that US stopped assistance for Moldova. It was a good sign, a good news, trying to say that all this support was going actually to fund criminal organizations like civil society organizations, media, and so on and so forth, which was of course fake because the majority support that Moldova got from USAID, from US, actually was supporting strategic projects of resilience, democratic resilience, but also infrastructure projects, energy projects. So we had a big impact. I mean, for us, it was very challenging. In the beginning of the year, to have a phase out of US assistance from Moldova, that increased pressure on Moldova. EU was here close, and EU provided alternatives to fill in. I mean, the one example was the energy support package of 330 million euros, which was found on time in a moment of a crisis generated by Russian Transnistria region, and that actually was very important for us. But what it is interesting is that we in the electoral campaign, we had a clear announcement by US that they would resume assistance. And actually one of the concrete projects that they say that they will resume was very important, strategic energy independence project about building up a second grid to connect Moldova with Romania in terms of supplying electricity. And that was, I mean, over $170 million, I think, project. And that was an important indicator of the geopolitical understanding of US positioning here in Moldova, and this cross-party support that Moldova always had from US in time. I mean, both Republicans and Democrats. We had a lot of statements, cross-party statements made by the Congress in the elections about denouncing Russia's interference in Moldova. You still had over the year the update of the sanctioning list by the Treasury Department of actors like Shore and his new cryptocurrency banking whatever scheme that was used and still is used by them and Russia to avoid international sanctions and money launder billions of dollars and so on and so forth. So you would see support from US coming, and I think this was important to mention that despite this overall challenging transatlantic environment, very much in the last almost 1 year, less than 1 year. But I think US is present, and I think the changing attitude and the important role that US took in terms of to bring just peace for Ukraine and this interaction with the US, I think helped a lot to disarm Russia propaganda, Russian narratives, and at the same time, unite basically our partners in the effort to support Moldova to resist and to defend this democratic elections, because I think it was a strategic gain by the EU, US, Moldova. Very important one. Another one, because I think in the last elections that Moldova had, Russia lost, and the stakes for these elections were very high. So in this time, we also managed to win with the support of our partners, but most importantly, with a more resilient, more prepared society.
If I could add something on these topics.
Go ahead, Paula.
In terms of USAID, a lot of independent media relied on USAID grants, and they have really felt the consequences of that withdrawal. Some European grants and projects have kind of chipped in and have been helpful, but then there are also kind of structural reasons, kind of structural features of the advertising market that these independent media are kind of fighting against as well. And then also something that's different from my point of view in how the EU acts in Moldova versus how USAID acted is that USAID had a kind of business approach. So they invested a lot in our wine industry, helping it to move away from Russia after the many embargoes that Russia put on it, and to kind of deliver to other markets, European, Asian, and so on. And then they invested in our textile industry and in the creative industries. The good news is that the people who are running USAID in Moldova are now part of the Ministry of Economy. So hopefully they will be able to use their experience and capacity to move the Moldovan economy further as we integrate in the EU. On the Transnistria vote, I am actually a bit more kind of skeptical than these positive analysis of the vote. So we had around 12,000 votes from Transnistria in this election. That's like maybe around 10%, maybe less of the population. And these are people who made an effort to actually cross the bridge and go into the villages and towns in Moldova where they had assigned polling stations. So actually, I think these are people who are like quite politically motivated. And I went as a journalist to report from 2 of these polling stations. And what I noticed was that there were these kind of very vivid debates that started within queues. So I would start talking to one person who would tell me pro-Russian view, for instance, and then the person in front of them would start arguing with them, saying, oh, but you know, you're wrong, and so on. So there was this kind of polarization that I saw in real time in these queues, and you didn't see that in the rest of the polling stations. I guess because people in Moldova are used to already expressing their views openly, and so they wouldn't argue about it in the voting queue in the way that people from Transnistria who live under a more kind of authoritarian regime would be afraid to voice what they really think. So, and proof to that, they refuse to have their portraits taken, even if they accepted to kind of talk to me, but without giving their full names. So I am actually quite nervous about how the reintegration may pan out, because in both Gagauzia and Transnistria, we have these kind of alternative informational spaces, which are dominated by Russian narratives and anti-Chisinau narratives. And these can always express in political votes, and that can actually change the electorate, the way the electorate looks in Moldova.
Well, in Gagauzia, it will not change a lot, looking at the overall perceptions there and political support they have seen for many years, and Russia's role and influence there. But I mean, with the exception, I mean, to compare Gagauzia and Transnistrian region, I think on the short term, I think Transnistria represents a bigger challenge for us than Gagauzia, because Gagauzia is part of Moldova, and Moldovan authorities do have control of the region. I think the fact that you know, all this criminal affair that helped to win local elections in Gagauzia in 2022 for the Shore network, the exposure of that, but also I think the follow-up of these parliamentary elections, I think should be something that both political parties should consider and be more present there, and be more courageous in engaging there with the communities, reaching out to communities. The authorities should do much more in order to continue this, you know, reintegration policy of the society. We as a civil society, we all should continue our effort. But the challenge for Transnistrian region is that indeed the hybrid defense umbrella is not reaching Transnistrian region at all. You have the Russian information space present. You have the local, you know, this driven information activity campaign propaganda of the authorities in the region. Colleagues from Promolex and colleagues from Watchdog over the last year, they did a lot of research about narratives propagated in the region. And you see quite great alignment of Russian narratives and the narratives propagated in the Transnistrian region. So you don't have, a free media there. You don't have a civil society, which is free to act, because if you act against the administration, even misspell the name of Krasnoselsky, you get into the prison and stay in the prison. So you don't have any democratic, tools there to operate. On top of it, you have intelligence presence of Russia, and you have the military presence of Russia. And what we have seen actually in the last years, actually the region was weaponized. I mean, the region was used as a field of attack against Moldova in terms of disinformation activities, cyber attacks, and attempts to do provocations. What helped to stabilize the situation was actually very pragmatic matters. The fact that the region is basically closed from its a logistics hub that was previously exploited, which was Odessa, because of the war. The region is 100% dependent on Moldova today in terms of food, goods, everything supply. The region business is anchored in the EU. The interest of the business is anchored in the EU. So the kleptocratic elites in the region, I think they are in a very, very challenging situation under the pressure of Russia ahead of elections, where, again, these local elections, so-called local elections. So it's sure that Russia would attempt to loyalize or to take an active stance in the region, to even challenge the existing leadership, even though, unrecognized, and to put in place people that will be more loyal to Russia, like, even though not very successful, like Shore Network lately. But imagine a situation when this Shore Network will be engaged into local elections in Transnistrian region, doing more business with Russia and with the bank of the Minister of Defense, which is basically the one of the hands of GRU, acting with this, PSB and A7, whatever cryptocurrency, a lot of more resources and so on and so forth. And we don't know still what is in it, this shady scheme of supplying of gas in Transnistrian region. We don't know who is actually behind there, and so on. But what we know is that actually the region is paying for the gas, and most likely this is coming from Sharif funds, including. So the resources and the situation in the region is quite challenging for them. And Russia would seek this opportunity to further entrench. That is clear. And this is something that we should focus on. And indeed, we should look at and try to discourage Russia from any attempts to further entrench there, because the Russian influence in the region is lowering, but still is there. And that should be a further preoccupation of Ukraine, of Moldova, of EU, of US. We need to raise costs of any attempts of Russia to continue this hybrid warfare interference. And at the same time, create conditions for further, connecting and bridging the people of Moldova on the both bank of the river Dniester, and advancement into reintegration of the country.
Thank you so much, Iulian. And on this cautiously optimistic and positive note, I'm afraid we have to wrap up our discussion. Thank you so much to both of you. I think it was a very good conversation that had a good balance of what the opportunities are now for Moldova, what its strengths are, how it has managed to indeed achieve this election result despite all odds. In a sense, the fact that it does have a lot of instruments at its disposal, it has used them to combat Russian interference. It will hopefully and most likely continue to do so with the support and help of the EU. But of course, a lot of reasons for concern as well in terms of how the next political configuration will work out. What are we to expect from Russia in the future? There are a number of challenges. And I do agree with Iulian, I think, on the importance of this, the societal level, and how this needs to be strengthened and be made more resilient, because at the end of the day, I think there was also a question about the whether democracies should take off their gloves during election campaigns. Well, I would say that Moldova has done so quite well. It has done a lot of things that many democracies have shied away from, like banning parties. But of course, that needs to be done very carefully. And the other issue that the question was raising, indeed, how can pro-Russian parties be contained to reduce the damage that they may inflict on Moldova's democracy? Again, that the root of that lies also at the societal level at the end of the day. So a lot of
also with the justice reform.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Without institutions in place, of course, nothing can be done. Thank you so much once again, both of you, for the very interesting, very insightful conversation, timely reflections in the context of this webinar. Thank you also to the audience for raising so many relevant and thought-provoking questions. Should you want to learn more about our work within the project REDEMOS, you are very welcome to visit our website, redemos.eu, as well as follow us on our social media channels, where you can find out our latest news. You can also watch recordings of all of our past webinars on our website and the project's YouTube channel. We have a number of webinars that cover all of the countries that we are working on, the countries of the Eastern neighborhood, and recent political developments in these countries over the past 2 to 3 years. So if you're curious, please go and do check them out. Thank you once again, everyone. Thank you, Iulian. Thank you, Paula. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Cheers.